My mother held Eleanor Whitmore's hand across a hospital cafeteria table while they explained, together, why my son should not exist. That son is now on the cover of Forbes. And last Thursday, Eleanor Whitmore sat in the third row of a ballroom at the Drake Hotel, pearl earrings, charcoal dress, chin up, and watched him accept an award for a $200 million deal she had no part in building. She didn't see me until it was too late to leave. I want to tell you exactly what happened in that room. But first I have to take you back to February, to fluorescent lights and cold coffee and a 30-minute break I didn't know would change every single thing. 7 months pregnant. Double shift. The kind of tired that gets behind your eyes and stays there. Eleanor Whitmore drove 45 minutes to meet me in the hospital cafeteria, the one place she knew I couldn't leave. My break was 30 minutes. She'd timed it. Later I would realize she'd called my mother first, coordinated the visit, planned where they'd sit so I'd have to face both of them at once. My mother was already there when I walked in. I stopped when I saw her. Just for a second. Just long enough to understand what kind of meeting this was. She didn't stand up. I sat down. Set my tray on the table. The scrambled eggs were already cold. Eleanor didn't touch her coffee. Just held it. Like a prop. "We're worried about you." My mother's voice was quiet. Reasonable. The voice she used when she'd already decided and just needed me to agree. "You're 26. You're alone. Nursing school debt, a lease you can barely cover. David is gone," Eleanor said. Flat. No apology in it. "He's not coming back for this. You know that. This. Not times him. Not times the baby. This. You're not in a position to do this alone." Eleanor set the coffee down. "I'm not being cruel. I'm being honest. Alone at 26 with a baby and that kind of debt isn't a life. It's a sentence." She slid something across the table, a folded piece of paper with a phone number on it. "There's a clinic. I've already spoken to them. They're discreet. We can handle everything before your shift ends." I looked at the paper. I looked at my mother. She nodded. Once, I stood up. My hands were shaking so hard the silverware rattled against the tray. I picked it up anyway. Walked it to the return window. Said nothing. I had 12 hours left on my shift. I worked every one of them. That night I drove home to Ridgeland Avenue. 2nd floor. 1 bedroom. The heat made a sound in the pipes, like something trying to get out. I sat in the parking lot with the engine running for 40 minutes. Not crying. Just sitting. I kept thinking about the word time sentence. The way Eleanor said it, like she was doing me a favor, like taking away the only thing that was mine would somehow set me free. I thought about my mother nodding. I thought about David's text. 4 months earlier, "I need space to figure things out." No address. No call. Just that sent at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and then nothing. I sat in that parking lot until the windows fogged over and I couldn't see the building anymore. Then I went inside, put my hand on my stomach, said out loud, to no one, to him, "It's you and me." What came next, I'm going to tell you straight, without decoration. Double ICU shifts. 12 on, 4 off. 12 on again. James slept in a second-hand crib 3 feet from my bed because the apartment had no second room. I finished my nursing certification with textbooks spread across a kitchen counter that doubled as a changing table. Neither family called. Not when he was born. Not for his first Christmas. Not when he learned to walk. Or talk. Or write the letter J in green crayon on the back of a water bill envelope, which I still have. 4 years of total silence from 2 families. And then David came back. Not with an apology. Not with anything I could have predicted. Custody papers. Filed in Cook County. Full petition for primary physical custody of a son he had never once asked about. I read them 3 times. Standing at my kitchen counter. Before I understood what I was actually looking at, Eleanor was funding it. The woman who called my son times, who slid a clinic's phone number across a cafeteria table, now wanted him. She just didn't want me anywhere near the picture. This wasn't David missing his son. David didn't know his son's middle name, didn't know his pediatrician, didn't know that James slept with a small fan on because the white noise helped, or that he was afraid of the smoke detector, or that he called macaroni and cheese times yellow pasta times and refused to call it anything else. This was Eleanor Whitmore looking at a 4-year-old boy who existed despite her, who was growing up and getting real and becoming a person and deciding the story needed to be rewritten, with her family's name on it. Without me, I had a legal aid attorney named Paul who carried his files in a reusable grocery bag. Eleanor had a private firm and 11 months of patience. I want you to understand what it feels like to have someone try to take your child through the legal system. Not a confrontation. Not a fight you can see coming. Just paper. Just language. Just the machinery of something enormous and expensive moving slowly and deliberately toward the only thing you have. James was 4 years and 2 months old. He'd just learned to write the letter J. They dressed my survival as evidence of failure. Insufficient parental availability due to demanding work schedule. Lack of extended familial support network. Financial instability inconsistent with the child's developmental needs. Every double shift I worked to keep James fed. Every night I studied at that kitchen table after he fell asleep. Every sacrifice they had turned it into a document. Filed it with the court. Made it look like abandonment instead of devotion. The first deposition lasted 4 hours. Eleanor's attorney asked me to describe a typical Tuesday. So I did. Wake at 4:15. Drop James at daycare by 5:40. 12-hour ICU shift. Pick him up by 6:30 if the charge nurse let me go on time. Dinner, bath, story, bed. Then back to the kitchen table with documents I barely understood, preparing for the next court date while my coffee went cold. She wrote everything down without expression. David sat across the conference table looking rested. Clean shirt, fresh haircut, hands folded. 4 years of total absence, and he'd arrived at that deposition like a man applying for a promotion he'd always deserved. His attorney argued he'd matured, that he was time's now positioned to offer stability. Eleanor's affidavit backed every word. My attorney, Paul, did something quietly devastating. He subpoenaed David's phone records. 4 years of them. No calls, no texts, no birthday messages, no child support. Not one contact with the hospital when James had an ear infection at 18 months and I had to take him to the ER at 2 in the morning by myself. Not one. Paul laid the records across the table during the second hearing and let the judge read the silence for herself. The case came down to one question no one wanted to say out loud directly. Is a mother who works too much worse than a father who never showed up? The judge said no. I won. James stayed with me. And Eleanor Whitmore walked out of that courthouse with nothing, not the boy, not the story she'd planned to rewrite. I watched her go from the steps. She didn't look back. I drove home. Made James dinosaur-shaped pasta for dinner. He called it Times Special Yellow Pasta Times because of the shapes. I did not think about Eleanor Whitmore once that night. James asked about his father for the first time at 7. We were eating cereal. The same kitchen table. He looked up from his bowl and said, completely without warning, the way children ask the things they've been holding. Mom, did my dad not want me? I set my spoon down, took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. Your dad wasn't ready, I said. That's about him, not about you. It has never been about you. He nodded slowly, the way children do when they're storing something for later. I watched him go back to his cereal, and I made myself a promise. Right there, at that table, with the morning light coming through the kitchen window and the pipes making their sound in the walls, I would build something, not for me, for him, so that when he was old enough to understand what had been done to us, he would also see what we'd made out of it. I got my real estate license when James was 9. Studied at that same kitchen table after he fell asleep. Same cold coffee, different documents. By the time James turned 16, he could read a property listing faster than I could. We drove neighborhoods on weekends, not the nice ones, the forgotten ones, the ones the city had stopped looking at. He'd point at boarded windows and say, "That one, Mom. What do you think?" Our first flip was a condemned duplex on 43rd and Paulina. $38,000 at a county tax auction. Money I'd saved over 3 years of commission checks, kept in a separate account I didn't touch for anything else. James ripped out carpet beside me on weekends. We ate sandwiches on the porch steps while plaster dust settled around us. He was 16. And he asked questions about everything: zoning, financing, load-bearing walls, what made a neighborhood turn. 6 months later, we sold it for $127,000. He looked at me when the wire hit the account and said, "What's next?" 6 more buildings. A small LLC. James learning every piece of it: contracts, inspections, investor relations, the particular patience required to move a permit through city bureaucracy without losing your mind. I brought in a business partner named Ray to handle accounting. He came recommended. He seemed careful. He talked about integrity the way people do when they want you to stop looking too closely. 3 weeks before closing on our 7th property, I opened the LLC account online. Balance: $211. Ray had transferred everything. Every dollar from every sale. Every reserve. Everything James and I had spent 9 years building. Quietly. At kitchen tables. On porch steps. In the car between properties. Gone. No note. No warning. Disconnected number. I sat in the car outside the office. I don't know how long. Long enough for the light to change twice, and for me to stop being able to feel my hands. James found me there. Opened the passenger door. Looked at my face. How bad? All of it. He sat down. The door clicked shut. Quiet for a moment, not the panicked kind, the thinking kind. Then he said, "So we start again." I looked at my son. This boy they'd told me would ruin my life. 21 years old, sitting in a car outside an office with a cleaned-out account and a disconnected number, and what he said was time, so we start again. "There's something I've been working on," he said. "I need to show you." He reached into the back seat for a folder. And while I was mourning what Ray had taken, James had already started thinking around it. For 6 months, quietly, he'd been developing a proposal. A mixed-use community development on the south side, the kind of project the city had been promising for 15 years without delivering. Affordable units on top, retail on the bottom, community space in between. Built in a neighborhood that had been written off so many times it had stopped waiting to be written back in. He laid it on the kitchen table. Same chairs. The numbers were right. The community engagement plan was real. He'd spent weekends at block association meetings I didn't even know about, listening before he ever said a word. 2 aldermen were already interested. He had a contact at a development lending institution who believed in the project. What he didn't have was a track record large enough to anchor a deal this size. "That's the problem," he said. "But not one we can't solve." He was 21 years old. I looked at the proposal. I looked at my son. "You've been building this since before Ray," I said. "Since before Ray," he confirmed. The duplex on 43rd and Paulina, the one property Ray hadn't touched, held separately under a deed James had quietly structured differently after his first read of our LLC agreement at 17 that was still ours. Clean. Clear. We used it as collateral. James spent the next year building the team, the trust, the documentation. I watched him work the way I'd watched him work since he was 16, pointing at boarded windows from a moving car. Patiently, methodically, without the performance of urgency. By 24, 11 projects. By 26, the Southside deal closed. $200 million. The largest community-centered development the city had approved in a decade. Forbes ran a 3-page feature. They photographed him on the site, hard hat off, blueprints under his arm, standing on a lot that used to be a condemned gas station 2 blocks from where we'd eaten our first porch step sandwiches. My name wasn't in the article. James told me not to worry about that. "I'll handle it," he said, at the right moment. I didn't know what he meant. Not until the night of the gala. The ballroom at the Drake had ceilings so high your voice disappeared before it reached the chandeliers. 230 guests. Developers, city officials, journalists, architects I'd only ever seen quoted in print. I bought a navy dress that afternoon. First new dress in 3 years. The tag was still in my bag when I sat down. I was in the 4th row. James had placed me there himself. I didn't notice Eleanor until the lights dimmed. 3rd row. Left side. Pearl earrings. A charcoal dress that cost more than my first car. She settled into her seat the way she always had, like the room had been arranged around her. My body registered her before my mind caught up. A cold feeling. Low and steady. She hadn't seen James in 19 years. Hadn't seen me in 19 years. Had found out about the deal about the Forbes feature, I still don't know how. Old money has a way of sensing new money, especially when it's grown in soil they tried to poison. I thought, she's going to try to get close to him. I thought, she's going to try to make this part of her story. The room went quiet as James walked to the podium. He looked out over 200 faces. He didn't use notes. Everything I've built started with one person who refused to let me be erased. His eyes found mine. Fourth row. Didn't look away. My mother was told I would ruin her life. She was 26, alone, working double ICU shifts, when two women sat across from her in a hospital cafeteria and told her to give me up. Research shows almost 2/3 of women in that situation feel pressured by the people closest to them. My mother was one of them. The room was very still. She said no. She worked. She fought a custody case funded by people with more money than conscience. She built a business from nothing and then watched someone steal it. And then she built it again. He paused. She never asked me to remember any of that. I remembered it anyway. No mention of David. Not one syllable about the Whitmore name. Just me. Just what happened. Just the truth of it, spoken plainly in a room full of people who had never had to fight for the right to exist. The applause started slow, then built into something that came up through the floor. I couldn't feel my hands again, but differently this time. The reception spilled into the adjoining room. White tablecloths, past champagne. The low hum of people performing their success at each other. I stood near a window overlooking Michigan Avenue, just breathing, letting the noise of the room wash around me without having to be part of it. You must be so proud. I knew the voice before I turned. Eleanor Whitmore. 3 feet away. Champagne flute untouched. Her posture impeccable, as always. But something in her eyes was working harder than the rest of her face, moving across me like she was trying to reconcile two versions of the same woman and couldn't quite make them fit. He's extraordinary, she said. Truly. I've followed his work. Followed, like he was a stock she'd been tracking. I think there's something worth discussing. Her voice warmed with practiced ease. The Whitmore Foundation has been looking to invest in exactly this kind of community development initiative. James's vision aligns with what we've been. I said. She paused. Reset. Family can accomplish remarkable things together. She extended her hand. We should talk. All of us. There it was. 19 years of silence. And now, Now, family. Now, a hand extended in a ballroom because the boy she called times across a cafeteria table had become someone whose story she wanted to be part of. She had rewritten it completely, made herself a grandmother who'd been waiting, made the distance a misunderstanding, made the custody lawyers and the affidavits and the 11 months of war into something that had never happened, or had happened for reasons she could now explain. I looked at her hand. I didn't take it. From the doorway behind her. Hello, grandmother. Eleanor turned. James stood in the doorway. He hadn't knocked. He'd been there long enough. She dropped her hand. Slowly. Her face did something complicated. Surprise. Recalibration. The particular expression of someone who has been caught mid-performance and doesn't yet know how much was seen. James. His name in her mouth like something warm. Like familiarity. Like she'd been saying it all along. He stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind him. Quiet. He didn't look at me yet. Looked only at her. I heard you, he said. The foundation. The partnership. A pause. Not for effect. For precision. I want to make sure I understand what you're proposing. Because I've read the documents. She straightened slightly. Shifted into the register she trusted. Practical, forward-looking. Businesslike. Your father's side of the family has resources, James. Municipal connections that could significantly. My father. He let the words sit there until they meant nothing. Then he reached into his jacket and took out his phone. Open something. Turned the screen toward her. I requested the custody filings when I was 21, he said. Public record. Eleanor's face held. Your affidavit. Page 4. He read it without looking away from her. The petitioning mother demonstrates emotional instability, financial inadequacy, and an inability to provide a stable developmental environment. Placement with paternal family members would demonstrably serve the child's long-term interests. Each word placed deliberately. You filed that 14 months after you sat across from her in a hospital cafeteria in the place she couldn't leave, during the 30 minutes she had, and told her I would ruin her life. Eleanor said nothing. She was working double ICU shifts, paying her own way through nursing certification. Raising me in a one-bedroom apartment with a second-hand crib 3 feet from her bed, he lowered the phone. And you described that as instability. I watched her choose her response. Watched her decide. I was protecting. You were protecting the Whitmore name from a child you hadn't wanted to exist. His voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. That's what the document says. I've read it. Several times. Silence. She looked at me, then back at him. When she spoke, her voice had changed. Quieter. A different kind of calculation. I made mistakes. I can acknowledge that. But James, the resources available to you now. Through the foundation. Through the connections your father's family has maintained. My father's family. He put the phone back in his jacket. My father, who filed for custody of a son he had never once contacted, whose absence in my life is documented in 4 years of phone records my mother's attorney subpoenaed. That family. Eleanor opened her mouth. I grew up, James said, watching my mother lose everything twice. She worked until her hands shook. She fought for me when she had nothing left to fight with. She built something from nothing, had it stolen, and built it again. He looked at her steadily. She didn't do any of that with Whitmore money or Whitmore connections or Whitmore anything. She did it with what she had, which was herself and a kitchen table and a son who was paying attention. His hand settled on my shoulder. Warm. Solid. So, whatever you're offering, I need you to understand what it would cost. Eleanor stood very still. The champagne flute untouched in her hand. The pearls at her throat catching the light. Whatever she was going to say, I'll never know. Because James turned to me then, his hand still on my shoulder, and asked quietly, Ready? I looked at Eleanor Whitmore one last time. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Just clearly. The way you look at something that once had enormous power over you and realize, standing here, that it no longer does. Yes, I said. We left through the main hall. James stopped twice, once to shake hands with his development partner, once to thank the catering manager by name. A woman who'd worked that room for 20 years and who lit up when he said it. He knew her name. He'd asked it when we arrived. That's who he is. I glanced back once, from the hallway. Eleanor Whitmore stood at the edge of the reception room, still holding the untouched champagne. No one was speaking to her. No one in that room knew who she was. The valet brought the car around. James opened my door. We drove 3 blocks in silence. You okay? He asked. I thought about the cafeteria, the cold eggs. My mother's hand on the table next to Eleanor's coffee cup. The parking lot on Ridgeland Avenue with the windows fogged over. The custody papers at the kitchen counter. The deposition that lasted 4 hours. The account with $211. The porch steps on 43rd and Paulina with the plaster dust settling around us. The letter J, in green crayon, on the back of a water bill. Yeah, I said. The word came out steady. Real. Not performed. I'm okay. The city moved past us, lit up. Indifferent. Enormous. And I realized I'd been waiting 20 years for a moment that turned out to be quieter than I expected. Not a confrontation. Not a speech. Not Eleanor's face when she understood. Just this. Just my son, driving. Just the city lights blurring past. Just the feeling of having put something down that I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten what it felt like not to. I put my hand on the dashboard, felt the hum of the engine, breathed. We drove home. If you know someone who raised a child alone, who worked when they were exhausted and fought when they had nothing left, share this with them, not because they need to be told they did something remarkable. They already know. Share it because sometimes it matters to see yourself in a story that ends like this. Next week, the moment James told me what he'd really been working on while Ray was still in the picture. I wasn't ready for it then. I'm still not entirely ready to talk about it now. But I will.